Hey guys, tonight we're walking through the golden corridors of ancient palaces where passion burns hotter than the desert sun, where forbidden love threatens to topple kingdoms, and where the most powerful rulers in history risk everything for a single stolen kiss. You can almost hear the whispered secrets echoing off marble walls, feel the weight of royal scandal hanging in the incense-heavy air, and sense the dangerous electricity that crackles when desire meets divine power. You probably won't survive hearing about some of these affairs without questioning everything you thought you knew about ancient royalty. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment, letting me know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love knowing you're out there, settling in for another journey through history's most captivating secrets. Now let's find that cozy spot. Pull a blanket around you. You're standing at the edge of the Nile as the sun sets over ancient Egypt, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that would make the gods themselves weep with envy. The air is thick with anticipation, heavy with the scent of lotus blossoms and myrrh, and you can feel the weight of 3,000 years of secrets pressing down on your shoulders like the finest silk. Tonight you're about to witness love stories so scandalous, so earth-shaking, that they nearly brought the greatest civilization in human history to its knees. You close your eyes and let the warm breeze carry you back through the millennia, until you find yourself in the opulent chambers of Nefertiti, the most beautiful woman who ever lived. Her name means the beautiful one has come, and as you watch her move through her private quarters, you understand why entire kingdoms would wage war just for a glimpse of her face. But you're here to witness something far more dangerous than beauty. You're here to see how love, jealousy, and political intrigue intertwined like serpents around the throne of Egypt. The marble floors beneath your feet are warm from the day's heat, and tapestries depicting the gods flutter gently in the evening breeze that flows through the palace windows. You can hear the soft tinkling of golden jewelry, the whisper of linen against skin, and somewhere in the distance, the haunting melody of a lute being played by unseen hands. This is a world where love is a weapon as sharp as any blade, where a single glance can topple dynasties, and where the heart's desires burn with the intensity of the eternal flame in the temple of Ra. You watch as Queen Nefertiti stands before her bronze mirror, but the reflection staring back at her isn't just that of Egypt's most powerful woman. It's the face of someone whose love affair would scandalize an empire and threaten to destroy everything her husband, the Pharaoh Akhenaten, had built. You see the conflict in her eyes, the way her hands tremble slightly as she adjusts her golden headdress, because she knows that the passion burning in her heart for someone other than her divine husband could bring about the end of the world as she knows it. The scandal you're about to witness didn't happen overnight. It began with a single moment, a fleeting glance across a crowded throne room during a religious ceremony. Nefertiti's eyes met those of Smankar, a young nobleman whose beauty rivaled her own, whose intelligence matched her wit, and whose ambition burned as bright as the sun disk her husband worshipped. In that instant, as incense smoke swirled around them like the breath of the gods themselves, both their fates were sealed. You follow Nefertiti as she moves through the palace corridors, her bare feet silent on the cool stone floors, her heart pounding so loudly you're certain the guards can hear it echoing off the walls. She's heading to a secret meeting, one that could cost her everything: her crown, her children, her life, and possibly the stability of the entire kingdom. The affair between Nefertiti and Smenkhar wasn't just about love. It was about power, about religious revolution, and about the very soul of Egypt itself. As you drift deeper into this ancient scandal, you realize that Akhenaten, Nefertiti's husband, wasn't just any pharaoh. He was the revolutionary king who dared to challenge 3,000 years of religious tradition, who moved the capital of Egypt to a brand new city he built in the middle of the desert, and who declared that there was only one God worth worshipping, the 18, the disk of the sun. This wasn't just religious reform. It was the complete upheaval of everything Egyptians held sacred, and Nefertiti was supposed to be his partner in this divine mission. But love, as you're learning, doesn't care about divine missions or religious revolutions. Love is chaos, dressed in silk and perfumed with lotus oil, and it was about to tear apart the most powerful couple in the ancient world. You watch as Nefertiti slips through a hidden doorway into a garden where moonlight filters through date palm fronds, creating dancing shadows on the ground. The air is heavy with the scent of jasmine and night-blooming cereus, and you can hear the gentle splash of water from a fountain shaped like a lotus flower. This is where she meets Samenkhare, and as you observe their first forbidden embrace, you feel the earth itself seem to hold its breath. Their affair unfolds like a carefully choreographed dance of desire and danger. Secret messages hidden in bouquets of flowers, stolen moments in temple alcoves where the gods themselves seem to look away, in shame, passionate letters written on papyrus and smuggled through the palace by loyal servants who risk their lives for love. You witness intimate conversations conducted in whispers so soft that even the night wind strains to hear them, and you see how their love grows stronger even as the danger around them intensifies. But this isn't just a simple love triangle. As you delve deeper into the scandal, you discover that Samenkhara wasn't just any nobleman. He was Akhenaten's own brother, making this affair not just adultery, but a betrayal that struck at the very heart of the royal family. The implications were staggering. If Nefertiti bore Samenkhara's child, the entire line of succession could be thrown into chaos. If their affair became public knowledge, it could be seen as a sign that the gods disapproved of Akhenaten's religious revolution, potentially sparking a civil war that could tear Egypt apart. You find yourself in the royal archives, watching as scribes work by lamplight to carefully document every aspect of palace life. But even they don't dare write about what they're witnessing. The affair has become an open secret, whispered about in corners and communicated through meaningful glances, but never spoken aloud because the consequences would be too terrible to bear. Even the servants move more quietly through the halls, as if afraid that their footsteps might somehow give away the dangerous secret that threatens to consume them all. The tension in the palace becomes almost unbearable as you observe the careful dance that Nefertiti and Smenkhar perform around Akhenaten. During public ceremonies, they maintain perfect composure, their faces masks of royal dignity and religious devotion. But you can see the electricity that passes between them when their eyes meet across the throne room. The way Nefertiti's breath catches when Smenkhar's hand accidentally brushes hers during a ritual offering, and the dangerous fire that burns in both their eyes when they think no one is watching. Akhenaten, for his part, seems oblivious to the growing scandal, consumed as he is with his religious revolution and his attempts to reshape Egyptian society from the ground up. You watch him spend hours in prayer to his beloved Aten, commissioning artwork that depicts his family in intimate, loving poses that now seem tragically ironic, given what you know about his wife's betrayal. His devotion to his God and his family appears absolute, making the deception being carried out right under his nose all the more heartbreaking. But love affairs in royal households rarely remain secret forever, and this one was no exception. The first crack in their carefully constructed facade came during a festival celebrating the Aten, when a sharp-eyed courtier noticed the way Nefertiti and Semenchire synchronized their movements during a religious dance, moving together with an intimacy that spoke of countless hours of private practice. The courtier, whose name has been lost to history, but whose observational skills nearly changed the course of Egyptian civilization, began to watch more carefully, to note the small details that others had missed. You witness the growing paranoia that begins to consume the palace as more people become aware of the scandal. Servants who once moved freely through the royal quarters now find themselves under suspicion. Guards who had served the royal family faithfully for years suddenly find their loyalty questioned. Even the priests, normally focused solely on their religious duties, begin to whisper among themselves about whether the gods might be expressing their displeasure with the royal family through signs and omens. The breaking point comes during what should have been a moment of triumph for Akhenaten's religious revolution. During a grand ceremony meant to demonstrate the power and glory of the Akhenaten, Nefertiti and Semenchire were caught in a moment of intimate conversation that went far beyond what would be appropriate between a queen and her brother-in-law. A royal scribe, positioned to record the ceremony for posterity, witnessed an exchange of looks and whispered words that left no doubt about the true nature of their relationship. You feel the shock that rippled through the assembled crowd like a physical force. Courtiers, who had spent years carefully navigating palace politics, suddenly found themselves witnesses to a scandal that could destroy them all if they chose the wrong side. Priests who had devoted their lives to serving the royal family as living gods now faced the terrible possibility that their divine rulers were as flawed and human as anyone else. The very foundation of Egyptian society, built on the belief that the pharaoh was a living god chosen by the heavens, began to crack like a mud brick left too long in the sun. But the most devastating reaction came from Akhenaten himself. You watch as the realization dawns on his face. See the exact moment when his world, his marriage, his family, his divine mission crumbles around him like sand castles before the tide. The man who had challenged the gods themselves, who had moved mountains to build a new capital city, who had revolutionized 3,000 years of religious tradition, was brought to his knees by the simple, all-too-human reality of his wife's betrayal. The aftermath of the discovery was swift and merciless. Semenchire was banished from the court, sent away to a distant province where his beauty and charm could no longer threaten the stability of the kingdom. But banishment wasn't enough to satisfy the demands of justice and political necessity. Within months, news arrived that he had died under mysterious circumstances, whether from illness, accident, or something more sinister. You'll never know. But his death removed one source of scandal from Akhenaten's troubled reign. Nefertiti's fate was even more complex and tragic. Rather than execute or banish his beloved wife, Akhenaten chose a punishment that was perhaps more cruel than death. He erased her from history. You watch in horror as her name is chiseled away from temple walls, as her images are painted over with new faces, as her very existence is systematically removed from the official records of the kingdom. The woman who had once been celebrated as the most beautiful in the world became a ghost, a whisper, a shadow that haunted the palace corridors, but officially no longer existed. But the damage to Akhenaten's reign was already done. The scandal had revealed cracks in the foundation of his religious revolution that his enemies were quick to exploit. Priests who had never fully accepted his monotheistic reforms began to speak more boldly about returning to the old ways. Nobles who had grudgingly accepted his radical changes now questioned whether a pharaoh who couldn't control his own household was truly fit to rule Egypt. Military commanders who had sworn loyalty to him began to wonder whether the gods might favor a different leader. You witnessed the slow, inexorable collapse of everything Akhenaten had built as the scandal's consequences ripple outward like circles on the Nile's surface. His beautiful new capital city Akhenaten began to feel more like a prison than a paradise as courtiers and officials started making excuses to return to the old capital of Thebes. Trade relationships that had taken years to establish began to falter as Egypt's international reputation suffered from the royal scandal. Even the weather seemed to turn against him, as a series of poor harvests and natural disasters were interpreted as signs of divine displeasure. But perhaps the most tragic consequence of all was the effect the scandal had on Akhenaten himself. You watch as the confident revolutionary pharaoh who had dared to challenge the gods gradually transforms into a broken, paranoid shadow of his former self. He spends his days in obsessive prayer to his beloved Aten, begging for forgiveness and guidance. But the sun disk that had once seemed to smile down on him now feels cold and distant. His religious devotion, once the source of his strength and vision, becomes a desperate attempt to find meaning in a world that has betrayed him completely. The royal children, caught in the middle of this devastating scandal, suffer perhaps most of all. You see how the daughters who had once been celebrated as living goddesses now live under the shadow of their mother's disgrace. Their prospects for marriage, their positions in the succession, their very identities are all called into question by the scandal that has torn their family apart. Some historians believe that one of these daughters, Ankhesenemun, would later become Tutankhamun's wife, carrying the trauma of her parents' scandal into the next generation of Egyptian royalty. As years pass, you watch the kingdom that Akhenaten had tried to transform gradually return to its old ways. His religious revolution, weakened by scandal and political opposition, crumbles like sand. The temples to the Aten are abandoned or converted back to worship of the traditional gods. The beautiful city of Akhenaten is slowly reclaimed by the desert, its empty buildings becoming home to nothing but sand and wind. Even Akhenaten's name is eventually erased from official records, just as he had erased Nefertiti's, making him what Egyptologists would later call a heretic pharaoh, whose reign was considered so shameful that it was literally written out of history. But love affairs among Egyptian royalty didn't end with Akhenaten and Nefertiti. You find yourself drawn forward through time, carried by the warm desert wind to witness another scandal that would shake the foundations of the ancient world. This time, you're standing in the magnificent palace of Alexandria, where the scent of Mediterranean sea brine mingles with exotic spices from across the known world, and where the most famous woman in history is about to embark on love affairs that will change the course of civilization itself. Cleopatra Vedem, the last pharaoh of Egypt, moves through her palace like liquid gold poured into human form. You watch her in her private chambers as she prepares for what she knows will be the most important seduction in history. Not because she desires love, but because she needs to save her kingdom from the expanding power of Rome. Her beauty, legendary though it was, was just one weapon in an arsenal that included intelligence that could match any philosopher, political cunning that rivaled any general, and a magnetic charisma that could make even the most powerful men in the world forget their own names. The first of her great scandals involved Julius Caesar, the Roman general whose ambition burned as bright as her own. You witnessed their first meeting, arranged with theatrical precision that would have made the gods themselves applaud. Cleopatra has herself smuggled into Caesar's quarters wrapped in expensive carpets, and when she emerges before the most powerful man in the world, the air itself seems to catch fire with the intensity of their mutual attraction. This isn't just a seduction, it's a collision between two forces of nature. Two people who understand that love and power are just different words for the same thing. Their affair unfolds against the backdrop of civil war and political upheaval that threatens to tear both Egypt and Rome apart. You watch them make love in rooms hung with silk tapestries depicting the victories of pharaohs, while outside the palace walls, armies march and senators plot their destruction. Their passion is genuine, but it's also calculated, each lover using the other to achieve their own political goals, while genuinely losing themselves in a connection that transcends mere strategy. Caesar, the conqueror who had subdued Gaul and crossed the Rubicon, finds himself conquered in turn by a woman who embodies everything exotic and dangerous about the East. You see how their relationship transforms him from a practical politician into something approaching a romantic, how he begins to dream not just of ruling Rome, but of creating an empire that spans from Britain to India, with Cleopatra as his empress and Alexandria as a second capital to rival Rome itself. But their love affair produces more than just political alliance. It creates a son Caesarine, whose very existence threatens to upset the careful balance of power that holds the Roman Empire together. You witness the scandal that erupts when news of the child reaches Rome, how senators who had grudgingly accepted Caesar's relationship with a foreign queen now see it as proof that he has abandoned Roman values entirely. The birth of Caesarine isn't just a family matter, it's a political crisis that will contribute to the series of events leading to Caesar's assassination on the Ides of March. You're there in the Senate House on that fateful day, watching as 23 knife wounds end, not just Caesar's life, but Cleopatra's dreams of ruling the world. The news reaches Alexandria like a thunderbolt, and you see how the queen who had seemed unshakable finally breaks down, grieving not just for a lost lover, but for the future that has died with him. Her tears fall like liquid silver in the lamplight of her chamber, and for the first time you see her not as a goddess or a queen, but as a woman whose heart has been shattered by loss. But Cleopatra is nothing if not resilient, and you watch her transform her grief into a new kind of determination. If she cannot rule the world through Caesar, she will find another Roman to capture, another alliance to forge, another chance to save Egypt from absorption into the growing Roman Empire. This time, her target is Mark Antony, Caesar's former lieutenant, and one of the three men now ruling Rome in an uneasy alliance. The seduction of Mark Antony is perhaps the most famous in all of history, and you have a front row seat to watch it unfold. Cleopatra arrives to meet him dressed as Aphrodite herself, sailing up the Cydnus River on a golden barge with purple sails, perfumed with exotic oils. The oars that drive her vessel are made of silver, and they beat time to the music of flutes and harps while she reclines beneath a canopy of golden cloth, fanned by boys dressed as cupids. The entire display is calculated to overwhelm Antony's senses, to make him believe that he's meeting not just a queen but a goddess descended from Olympus itself. The plan works perfectly. Antony, the soldier who had fought beside Caesar in Gaul and survived the chaos following his assassination, finds himself as helpless before Cleopatra's charms as any inexperienced youth. You watch their first night together unfold in a chamber filled with rose petals and lit by 1,000 candles, where wine flows like water and their laughter echoes off marble walls covered in gold leaf. This is seduction, raised to the level of high art, every detail planned to create an experience so intoxicating that Antony will never be able to forget it. Their affair becomes the stuff of legend, but it's also a political and military alliance that threatens to reshape the Mediterranean world. Together they dream of an empire that would combine Roman military might with Egyptian wealth and Greek culture, ruled from Alexandria as the greatest city in the world. You witness their planning sessions, where strategic discussions about troop movements and supply lines are interrupted by passionate embraces, where maps of future conquests are spread out beside silk cushions still warm from lovemaking. But their grand dreams face opposition from Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir, who sees Antony's alliance with Cleopatra as both a personal betrayal and a threat to Roman supremacy. The scandal of their affair becomes a weapon that Octavian wields masterfully, portraying Antony not as a Roman patriot but as a man bewitched by foreign magic, a once great general reduced to a lovesick fool dancing to the tune of an Egyptian sorceress. You watch as the propaganda war escalates alongside the military preparations, as Octavian's agents spread stories throughout Rome about Antony's supposed transformation into an Eastern despot. They whisper about how he's adopted Egyptian customs, how he bows before Cleopatra as if she were a goddess, how he's promised to make Alexandria the capital of a new empire that would reduce Rome to a mere provincial city. Some of these stories are true, others are exaggerated, but all of them serve to turn Roman public opinion against the man who had once been hailed as one of the city's greatest heroes. The climax of this scandal comes at the Battle of Actium, where the combined fleets of Antony and Cleopatra face Octavian's navy in a confrontation that will determine the future of the civilized world. You're there on Cleopatra's flagship as the battle unfolds, watching as tactical decisions are influenced by the complex dynamics of their love affair. When Cleopatra's nerve breaks and she orders her ships to retreat, Antony's choice to follow her rather than continue fighting seals both their fates and changes the course of history. The aftermath is as tragic as it is inevitable. You follow them back to Alexandria, where they spend their final months together in a strange mixture of desperate celebration and growing despair. They hold lavish parties while Octavian's armies march closer, make love with passionate intensity, while their kingdom crumbles around them, and cling to each other like survivors of a shipwreck, watching the last piece of their raft slowly sinking into the depths. Their deaths, when they finally come, are worthy of the tragic love story that preceded them. Antony, believing false reports that Cleopatra has already killed herself, falls on his sword in the Roman fashion, but lives long enough to be carried to her side for one final embrace. You witness their last moments together. See how even facing death, their love burns as bright as it ever did, undimmed by defeat or the approaching end of their dreams. Cleopatra's death, a few days later, is perhaps the most famous suicide in history. Rather than face the humiliation of being paraded through Rome as Octavian's captive, she chooses to die as she had lived, on her own terms, with theatrical flair that ensures her story will be remembered forever. Whether by a spite or poison, her death marks not just the end of a life, but the end of an era, the final chapter in the story of Ptolemaic Egypt that had lasted for 3 centuries. But the love affairs of Egyptian royalty weren't always about politics and power. Sometimes they were driven by pure passion, and sometimes that passion led to consequences even more devastating than wars or the fall of kingdoms. You find yourself drawn deeper into Egypt's past, to the reign of Ramesses II, known to history as Ramesses the Great, whose love life was as legendary as his military conquests and architectural achievements. Ramesses ruled Egypt for 66 years, long enough to become a living legend in his own time, and during those decades, he accumulated wives and concubines the way other men collect precious stones. But among all his women, one stood out, not because she was his official queen, but because she was forbidden to him by every law of gods and men. You're about to witness a love affair so scandalous that it was covered up for 3,000 years, hidden so completely that modern archaeologists are only now beginning to piece together the truth. Her name was Buntrashite, and she was not just any woman in Ramesses' harem. She was his own daughter, born to one of his minor wives, and raised in the royal household with all the privileges befitting a princess of Egypt. The scandal you're about to witness isn't just about forbidden love. It's about the corruption of absolute power, about what happens when a man who considers himself a living god decides that even the most fundamental taboos don't apply to him. You watch young Buntreshit grow up in the palace at Pi-Ramesses, the magnificent new capital that her father built to showcase his power and glory. She moves through corridors lined with statues of her father, studies in rooms where his victories are painted on every wall, and learns from tutors who speak of him not as a man but as a god walking among mortals. In this environment, the line between filial respect and something darker begins to blur in ways that would horrify any normal family but seem almost inevitable in the rarefied atmosphere of absolute monarchy. The affair begins gradually, almost imperceptibly, as these things sometimes do. A hand that lingers too long during a ritual blessing, a look that carries more heat than fatherly affection, conversations that take place in private chambers when they should happen in public halls. You witness the slow corruption of what should have been the most natural and protective relationship in the world, watching as Ramesses' legendary charisma and Buntreshit's desperate need for approval combine in increasingly dangerous ways. The palace servants notice first, as they always do. They see how the pharaoh's visits to his daughter's chambers become more frequent and last longer. They observe the expensive gifts that begin to appear in her rooms, jewelry fit for a queen rather than a princess, perfumes from the far corners of the empire, silks so fine they seem to be woven from moonbeams themselves. Most tellingly, they notice how Buntreshit begins to carry herself differently, with a new confidence and a new kind of fear warring in her expression. But in a society where the pharaoh is considered a living god, who would dare to question his actions, you watch as the conspiracy of silence grows around them, as servants learn to avert their eyes, as courtiers perfect the art of pretending not to see what's happening right in front of them. Even the priests, normally the guardians of moral and religious law, find themselves unable to confront a situation that challenges everything they believe about divine authority and human morality. The affair reaches its crisis point when Buntreshit becomes pregnant. In any normal family, this would be cause for celebration, but in the royal household of Ramesses II, It represents a scandal so enormous that it threatens to tear apart the very fabric of Egyptian society. The child growing in her womb isn't just the product of incest, it's the offspring of a living God and his own daughter, a being whose very existence challenges every assumption about divine nature and royal legitimacy. You witness the frantic consultations that take place in the deepest chambers of the palace, where the pharaoh's most trusted advisors struggle to find a solution to a problem that shouldn't exist. Some advocate for the pregnancy to be terminated quietly, the evidence of the affair literally erased before it can threaten the kingdom's stability. Others argue for exile, suggesting that Buntreshite be sent away to a distant province where she can give birth in secrecy and raise the child far from court intrigue. A few brave souls even suggest that Ramesses himself should step down, recognizing that his actions have made him unfit to serve as Egypt's divine representative. But Ramesses, drunk on absolute power and genuinely convinced of his own divinity, chooses a different path. Rather than hide his shame, he decides to transform it into triumph. If he is indeed a god, he reasons, then perhaps his relationship with his daughter isn't incest, but something approaching the divine marriages that occur among the gods themselves. He begins to speak of their union as blessed by the heavens, as a sacred joining that will produce a child of unprecedented divine power. The propaganda campaign that follows is perhaps the most audacious in ancient history. You watch as court artists are commissioned to create works depicting the affair not as scandal, but as sacred mystery. Poets compose hymns celebrating the divine love between father and daughter. Priests are coerced into developing theological justifications for what everyone knows is fundamentally wrong. The entire apparatus of the Egyptian state is mobilized to transform one man's criminal behavior into religious doctrine. But not everyone is convinced by Ramesses' attempts to sanctify his scandal. You witness the growing unrest that spreads through the kingdom as news of the affair leaks beyond the palace walls. Farmers in the Nile Delta whisper that the gods must be angry to allow such abomination in the royal house. Merchants in the markets of Memphis speak quietly about whether a pharaoh who violates his own daughter can truly be trusted to protect the kingdom. Even the military, normally the most loyal supporters of their warrior pharaoh, begin to express private doubts about serving a leader whose personal conduct brings shame upon them all. The child, when it's finally born, becomes both the culmination of the scandal and its eventual resolution. You watch as the infant, whose sex and fate remain mysteries lost to history, is presented to the court with all the ceremony due a prince or princess of Egypt. But even as the rituals are performed and the blessings recited, you can see the doubt and disgust in the eyes of those forced to participate in this charade. The baby represents not the future of the dynasty, but its corruption, not divine blessing, but human weakness, elevated to the level of policy. The long-term consequences of Ramesses' scandal are more subtle, but no less devastating than those that followed other royal affairs. The respect that had made Egyptian pharaohs into living gods begins to erode as people realize that their supposedly divine ruler is capable of the same sins as any mortal man, perhaps even worse sins, since his power makes his transgressions more damaging to society as a whole. The religious authority of the monarchy, built up over thousands of years of tradition, begins to crack under the weight of hypocrisy and moral corruption. You observe how the scandal affects the royal family itself, how Ramesses' other children live under the shadow of their father's crime, how his wives and concubines struggle to maintain their dignity while serving a man who has revealed himself capable of the ultimate betrayal of family bonds. The palace that had once been a place of celebration and cultural achievement becomes a place of whispered conversations and furtive glances, where everyone knows the truth, but no one dares speak it aloud. Even Ramesses himself seems to be affected by the growing weight of his actions. You watch as the confident, charismatic pharaoh who had once commanded armies and built monuments gradually becomes more isolated, more dependent on the flattery of sycophants and the comfort of religious ritual. His later years are marked by increasingly desperate attempts to prove his divine nature through ever more grandiose building projects and military campaigns, as if he could somehow outrun the consequences of his personal failures through public achievements. The cover-up that follows Buntreshite's story is so complete that it takes modern archaeologists, armed with DNA analysis and advanced forensic techniques, to even begin to uncover the truth. You witness how the evidence of the affair is systematically erased from official records, how her name is chiseled away from monuments, how her image is painted over with those of more acceptable royal women. It's a pattern you've seen before with Nefertiti, this deliberate erasure of inconvenient truths from the historical record. But even as one scandal is covered up, another is brewing in the royal household. You find yourself drawn to yet another time and place, to witness how the human heart's capacity for both love and destruction seems to be magnified beyond all reason when it beats in the chest of someone with absolute power. This time you're in the court of Hatshepsut, one of the most successful female pharaohs in Egyptian history, whose own love life contained secrets that could have destroyed everything she had worked to achieve. Hatshepsut's rise to power was itself controversial. She was supposed to serve merely as regent for her young stepson Thutmose III. But instead, she took the unprecedented step of declaring herself pharaoh in her own right, complete with the false beard and masculine regalia that symbolized royal authority. But her political audacity was matched by personal passions that threatened to undermine everything she had fought to achieve. You watch her in her private chambers, removing the ceremonial beard and masculine clothing that she wore in public, revealing the woman beneath the pharaoh's facade. In these moments of privacy, you see not the confident ruler who had commanded the loyalty of Egypt's most powerful nobles, but someone struggling with the loneliness and isolation that comes with absolute power. The person who approaches her in these intimate moments isn't her husband or any official consort. It's Senenmut, her architect and advisor, whose relationship with the pharaoh contains depths that would scandalize the court if they ever became public knowledge. Senenmut isn't just any court official. He's a man of humble origins who has risen to unprecedented heights through his intelligence, artistic vision, and close relationship with Hatshepsut herself. You observe their working sessions, where discussions about architectural plans for her magnificent mortuary temple gradually give way to conversations of increasing intimacy. There's something electric in the air when they're together, a connection that goes far beyond the professional relationship between pharaoh and advisor. Their affair, when it finally begins, is conducted with a secrecy that would make spies envious. You witness clandestine meetings in temple chambers where the only witnesses are statues of the gods, passionate encounters in architectural drawing rooms where their love is literally surrounded by the plans for monuments that will outlast them both by thousands of years. Every kiss is stolen. Every embrace carries the risk of discovery and destruction, but the attraction between them is too powerful to resist. The scandal of their relationship isn't just about a pharaoh taking a lover. It's about the most powerful woman in the ancient world, risking everything for a man whose social status should make him unworthy of her attention. In a society where pharaohs typically married their siblings or other members of the royal family to maintain divine bloodlines, Hatshepsut's choice to love a commoner represents a rejection of everything her culture considers sacred about royal authority. You watch as their relationship deepens and becomes more dangerous to them both. Senmut begins to appear in official art and inscriptions in ways that suggest a status far beyond what any architect should enjoy, no matter how talented. His tomb, when it's eventually built, contains innovations and honors typically reserved for members of the royal family. Most scandalously, some artwork seems to suggest that he and Hatshepsut are depicted together in poses that imply intimate familiarity rather than mere professional association. The political implications of their affair become increasingly serious. Her stepson Thutmose III, now grown to adulthood, watches with growing resentment as his rightful inheritance is delayed by a woman he sees as a usurper, and his anger is intensified by rumors about her relationship with a man of common birth. The scandal gives Thutmose and his supporters ammunition to use against Hatshepsut, ammunition that threatens to transform their political disagreement into something approaching moral crusade. You witness the growing tension in the palace as the two camps, those loyal to Hatshepsut and those supporting Thutmose III, engage in increasingly sophisticated political warfare. Senenmut finds himself caught in the middle, his relationship with the pharaoh making him a target for those who want to destroy her credibility and legitimacy. Every public appearance becomes an exercise in careful choreography, every official document a potential weapon in the hands of their enemies. The crisis reaches its peak when Hatshepsut makes a decision that reveals just how deeply her love for Senmut has compromised her judgment. You watch in fascination and horror as she grants him unprecedented honors, including the right to build his tomb in the Valley of the Kings, a privilege that should be reserved exclusively for pharaohs and their immediate family members. This isn't just favoritism. It's a complete abandonment of 3,000 years of sacred tradition, and it provides Thutmose III with exactly the evidence he needs to challenge her fitness to rule. The backlash is swift and merciless. You observe as priests who had grudgingly accepted a female pharaoh now openly question whether someone who would violate such fundamental traditions could truly be considered divine. Military commanders who had supported Hatshepsut's peaceful reign begin to worry that her personal scandals might weaken Egypt's international reputation. Even common citizens, who had generally benefited from her stable and prosperous rule, start to whisper that perhaps the gods are expressing their displeasure through signs and omens. Senenmut's fate becomes a cautionary tale about the dangers of loving too far above one's station. You watch as he gradually disappears from official records and court life, not through dramatic execution or public disgrace, but through the slow, inexorable process of being erased from history. His name is chiseled away from monuments he helped design. His images are painted over with those of more acceptable figures, and his tomb, the very symbol of his unprecedented rise, is left unfinished and abandoned. Hatshepsut herself, despite her political acumen and genuine achievements as a ruler, finds her reign increasingly undermined by the scandal surrounding her personal life. You witness her final years as a study in the tragic consequences of allowing passion to override political wisdom. The woman who had successfully challenged gender norms and ruled Egypt for over 2 decades gradually loses support from the very people who had once celebrated her strength and independence. When Thutmose III finally assumes full power after Hatshepsut's death, his revenge is systematic and thorough. You watch as he orders the defacement of her monuments, the destruction of her statues, and the removal of her name from official records. But perhaps the most telling aspect of his campaign against her memory is how thoroughly he eliminates any trace of Senenmut, ensuring that even the memory of their scandalous love affair is wiped clean from Egyptian history. But the pattern of royal scandals destroying dynasties doesn't end with Hatshepsut. You find yourself drawn forward through time once again to witness another love affair that would shake the foundations of Egyptian society and contribute to the eventual decline of pharaonic power. This time, you're in the court of Ramesses III, one of the last great pharaohs of the New Kingdom, whose reign would be marked by military victories abroad and romantic disasters at home. The palace intrigue you're about to witness revolves around not one but multiple love affairs, all centered around the pharaoh's harem and the complex web of relationships, jealousies, and political alliances that flourished in that hotbed of royal sexuality. You observe as Ramesses III, like his namesake before him, accumulates wives and concubines with the casual ease of a collector acquiring rare artifacts. But unlike his predecessor, he lacks the political skill to manage the explosive tensions that such arrangements inevitably create. At the center of this brewing storm is T, one of Ramesses III's minor wives, whose beauty and intelligence have made her a favorite in the royal bed, but whose ambition far exceeds her official status. You watch her move through the harem quarters like a predator stalking prey, using her sexuality and wit to build a network of allies and supporters who share her frustration with their secondary status in the royal hierarchy. Her ultimate goal isn't just to become chief queen, it's to ensure that her son, rather than the heir apparent, inherits the throne of Egypt. The weapon she chooses for this ambitious scheme is seduction, but not of the pharaoh himself. He's already firmly under her spell during their private moments together. Instead, she sets her sights on Pentaweret, the designated heir to the throne, a young man whose inexperience and romantic nature make him vulnerable to her sophisticated charms. You witness their first encounter during a religious festival, where T approaches the prince with a combination of maternal warmth and subtle sexuality that confuses and attracts him in equal measure. What follows is perhaps the most complex and dangerous seduction in Egyptian royal history. When he doesn't simply seduce Pentaweret, she corrupts him, gradually convincing him that his father's reign has grown stagnant and that Egypt needs younger, more dynamic leadership. She plants seeds of ambition and resentment in his mind while simultaneously binding him to her through sexual passion that becomes increasingly obsessive and dependent. You observe their secret meetings in temple chambers and garden alcoves where political conspiracy and physical intimacy become so intertwined that it's impossible to tell where one ends and the other begins. But T's ultimate plan is even more audacious than simple seduction. She's orchestrating nothing less than the assassination of Ramesses III, to be carried out by a conspiracy that includes not only Pentaweret, but also several other members of the royal family, high-ranking court officials, and even some military commanders. The plot, when it's finally revealed, represents the most serious threat to pharaonic authority since the foreign invasions of the intermediate periods. You witness the final stages of the conspiracy as it unfolds with the precision of a military campaign. T has spent years cultivating her network of supporters, using her position in the royal harem to gather intelligence about the pharaoh's daily routines and security arrangements. She's promised her co-conspirators everything from high government positions to sexual favors, creating a web of mutual dependence and shared guilt that should ensure their loyalty even under torture. The assassination attempt, when it finally comes, takes place during what should have been a moment of religious celebration and royal triumph. You're there in the palace courtyard, as Ramesses III participates in a ceremony honoring the gods for Egypt's recent military victories, surrounded by the very people who are plotting his death. The attack is swift and brutal, carried out by palace guards who have been corrupted by Tai's promises and Pentawerd's naive enthusiasm for change. But the conspiracy fails, not because of any flaw in its planning or execution, but because of something its architects never anticipated: the genuine loyalty that most Egyptians still felt for their pharaoh, despite his personal failings. You watch as other guards, horrified by the attack on their divine ruler, immediately rally to his defense. The palace erupts in chaos, as conspirators and loyalists fight desperately for control of Egypt's future, with the outcome hanging in the balance for terrifying minutes that feel like hours. Ramesses III survives the initial attack, but his wounds are severe enough that he dies within days, leaving behind a kingdom in turmoil and a conspiracy that must be unraveled before it can spread further. The investigation that follows reveals the full scope of T's plot, and the evidence uncovered during the trials provides a shocking glimpse into the moral corruption that had infected the highest levels of Egyptian society. You witness the trials of the conspirators, conducted with a thoroughness that reveals just how seriously the surviving authorities took this threat to the pharaonic system. Tai herself is subjected to interrogation techniques that extract not just confessions but detailed accounts of how she used her sexuality and intelligence to corrupt some of Egypt's most powerful figures. Her testimony reveals a woman whose ambition was matched only by her complete lack of moral restraint, someone who viewed other human beings as tools to be used in pursuit of her own goals. Pentawerd's fate is perhaps the most tragic of all the conspirators. You watch as the young man who had been manipulated into betraying his own father faces the consequences of his naivety and weakness. Rather than face the humiliation of public execution, he's granted the mercy of being allowed to commit suicide. But even this final act is tainted by the knowledge that he's dying for crimes he might never have committed without TA's manipulation. The aftermath of the conspiracy reveals just how deeply royal scandals could damage the entire structure of Egyptian society. You observe as the new pharaoh, Ramesses IV, struggles to restore confidence in the monarchy while dealing with the practical problems created by his predecessor's assassination. Foreign enemies, sensing weakness, begin to probe Egypt's defenses more aggressively. Internal rivals start to question whether the pharaonic system itself might be fundamentally flawed if it could produce such spectacular failures of leadership. The harem system, which had been a symbol of royal power and prosperity for centuries, becomes a source of suspicion and fear. You watch as successive pharaohs implement increasingly strict security measures around their wives and concubines, turning what had once been pleasure palaces into something approaching high-security prisons. The sexual freedom that had once been considered a divine prerogative of kingship becomes a dangerous liability that threatens to destroy anyone who indulges in it. But perhaps the most devastating long-term consequence of these scandals is their effect on the Egyptian people's faith in their ruler's divine nature. You witness the gradual erosion of religious belief that had sustained pharaonic authority for 3 millennia. When pharaohs are revealed to be capable of the same sins as ordinary mortals, and often worse sins, because their power magnifies the consequences of their failures, the entire theological foundation of Egyptian monarchy begins to crumble. The pattern repeats itself throughout the later periods of Egyptian history, as you observe ruler after ruler falling victim to the same human weaknesses that had destroyed their predecessors. Love affairs lead to political scandals, sexual obsessions undermine military campaigns, and romantic entanglements create the very divisions that foreign enemies exploit to conquer and occupy the land of the pharaohs. You find yourself moving through the final centuries of independent Egyptian rule, watching as the great civilization that had once dominated the Mediterranean world gradually succumbs to a combination of external pressure and internal decay. The scandals you've witnessed weren't just personal tragedies, they were symptoms of a deeper disease that infected the entire pharaonic system, a corruption that made it impossible for Egypt to adapt to changing circumstances and maintain its position as a great power. The Persian conquest, the brief Macedonian interlude, the Roman occupation, all of these foreign dominations become possible, partly because the scandals surrounding royal love affairs had weakened Egyptian society's confidence in its own institutions and leaders. You observe how the memory of pharaohs who had risked everything for forbidden love gradually transforms from admiration for passionate rulers into cautionary tales about the dangers of allowing personal desires to override public responsibility. Even Cleopatra Vethem, the last pharaoh and perhaps the most famous royal lover in all of history, can be seen as the final chapter in this long story of how love affairs destroyed the greatest civilization in the ancient world. Her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, while politically motivated, ultimately contributed to the end of 3,000 years of pharaonic rule and the transformation of Egypt into a Roman province. You realize that you've witnessed something more than just a series of romantic scandals. You've seen how the human heart, with all its capacity for both creation and destruction, can reshape the course of history when it beats in the chest of someone with absolute power. The pharaohs' love affairs weren't just personal matters. They were historical forces that helped determine the fate of millions of people and the destiny of entire civilizations. As you drift through these final moments of ancient Egyptian independence, you can feel the weight of all the secrets you've uncovered, all the scandals you've witnessed, all the love affairs that shook the foundations of the ancient world. The golden age of the pharaohs is ending, brought down not by foreign armies or natural disasters alone, but by the very human weaknesses of the god-kings who ruled from the throne of Ra. The desert wind carries you back toward the present, back toward your own time and your own world, but the memories of what you've witnessed remain as vivid as the Egyptian sunset that painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson all those centuries ago. You've seen how love and power, passion and politics, desire and destruction can intertwine in ways that reshape the world, and how even the mightiest civilizations can fall when their leaders forget that being human means accepting the responsibility that comes with the power to affect other lives. The palaces where these dramas unfolded are now mostly ruins, their golden walls crumbled to dust, their silk hangings long since dissolved into the desert air. But the stories you've witnessed tonight, the scandals that nearly destroyed ancient Egypt's greatest pharaohs, remain as powerful and relevant as they were 3,000 years ago, reminding us that some aspects of human nature never change. no matter how much time passes or how much power we accumulate. In the end, you realize that these weren't just stories about ancient Egypt or long-dead pharaohs. They were stories about us, about the eternal human struggle between our hearts and our responsibilities, between what we want and what we ought to do, between the person we are in private and the role we're expected to play in public. The pharaohs may have called themselves gods, but their love affairs revealed them to be gloriously, tragically, devastatingly human. The echoes of their passion still whisper across the centuries, carried by that same desert wind that once brought the scent of lotus blossoms and myrrh through palace windows, where the most powerful people in the ancient world risked everything for love. Their scandals destroyed kingdoms, but they also created some of the most compelling and enduring stories in human history, reminders that even in the pursuit of absolute power, the human heart remains unconquerable and ultimately uncontrollable. As the last light fades from this ancient drama, you can almost hear the Nile still flowing past the ruins of palaces where pharaohs once loved and schemed and dreamed of ruling the world forever. The river remembers everything, carries all secrets in its eternal flow toward the sea, and in its gentle murmur, you can still detect the whispered confessions of royal lovers whose scandals shook the foundations of the ancient world, and whose passions burned bright enough to illuminate the darkness of history itself. If you enjoyed this ride, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss what's coming next. Drop a comment and let me know what you thought about these royal scandals, and tell me what time it is where you are right now. I love knowing that people all around the world are discovering these incredible stories alongside me. Until next time, keep your curiosity alive and your nights filled with wonder.